I see that everybody has joined, so good morning, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of January 20th, 2021. I'd like to call the members to order. This meeting is being held remotely through Zoom. Despite the fact that we are leveraging technology to hold these meetings due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we are gathered on is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin people have lived on this land since time immemorial, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in its territory, to be present in this territory. Those who do not need to participate in the meeting can also watch it live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel. A reminder to participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to the subcommittee, residents may still make submissions to the Planning Committee and Council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424, extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. To date, I have received no regrets. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they are called.
Member Halsell?
Present.
Member Podolsky?
I am here.
Councillor McKenney?
Present.
Member Conforti?
Here.
Councillor Brockington? Councillor Moffat?
Here.
Vice Chair Quinn?
Here.
Chair King?
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes for the meeting of December 8th, 2020 confirmed?
Carried.
Confirmed. So our first item on the agenda for planning, infrastructure, and economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services is an application to alter 593 Laurier Avenue West, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. So as the chair mentioned in front of the committee this morning, this is an application to alter the property at 593 Laurier Avenue East. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay,
Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay, so this property is known as the Alexander Fleck House, and it's a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. So this application is to permit the construction of a new 9-story apartment building with 6 residential units proposed within the historic building. The application also includes restoration and some alterations to the heritage building, including the removal of 2 later additions on the north and west facades. A zoning bylaw amendment application and also a site plan control application are required to facilitate this proposal. And the zoning application will be considered together with this report at the next planning committee. Next. The Alexander Fleck House is located on the north side of Laurier Avenue West at the corner of Bronson Avenue. Next. And the property contains a 2.5-story red brick building constructed in 1902. It was designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act for its cultural heritage value in 2013. And the Alexander Fleck House is a highly intact example of the Queen Anne Revival style. Its notable character-defining attributes include its complex roofline, its detailed stone and brickwork, and its arched and stained glass windows. Next. The Fleck House is also a landmark with its prominent location at the top of the hill coming up from Slater Street. There's a stone retaining wall that lines the edge of the property along Bronson, and this is also a character-defining attribute. Next. So this is the site plan of the proposed development. So the new building is sort of V-shaped, and it's located so as to frame the historic building on its north and west facades. The historic building will be attached to the new construction by a glass lobby on its west facade. Next. So the construction of the new building will require the removal of 2 existing additions on the north and west sides, and those are excluded from the designation. And these are those additions just up on the screen. Next. So this is the elevation facing Laurier Avenue. The base of the new building will be clad in red brick with a mix of glass and gray precast panels for the upper floors. On the sort of Laurier wing, there are step backs above the second story with recessed balconies that feature glass guardrails. Next. This is the elevation along Bronson. So as I mentioned, the additions on the west and north will be removed, and also the small covered entry vestibule on the east side. Once these are removed, the facades will be repaired and any necessary brick replacements will be made in kind. The proposal also includes restoration work on the detailed masonry and wood elements, including the half timbering, doors and windows, repair of the stained glass windows, and also some roof cladding. The stone retaining wall along Bronson will also be retained and conserved. However, a noise fence is required to run along the edge of the wall. Next. This is the landscape plan. So the proposal is to maintain a mix of soft and hard landscaping in the front yard, including 2 visitor parking spaces, as well as a wider front walkway. There's new plantings that are proposed throughout the property, including new ivy to be planted along the noise fence to help soften its appearance. The 2 large trees in the right-of-way will be retained and protected during construction. Next. So staff are recommending approval of the application as it meets Parks Canada's standards and guidelines. The proposal will retain and restore the Fleck House and its character-defining attributes, as well as its historic residential use. The new building will be compatible with the historic house through the use of red brick and stone cladding at the base, while the various gray panels and glazing of the upper floors distinguish the building as contemporary. Although the new construction will be taller than the historic building, if we go to the next slide, the step backs and recessed balconies provide some massing relief, and the V shape of the building allows the Fleck House to remain the prominent feature at the corner, so it maintains its landmark status. The new construction will also only be attached to the building by the glass vestibule, making it ultimately reversible. Although the noise fence will obscure some of the view of the historic house from Bronson, on balance with the retention of the stone retaining wall and the new ivy plantings, staff are of the opinion that its introduction is reasonable here. Next. In terms of consultation, Heritage Ottawa, the Dalhousie Community Association, and neighbors within 30 meters were notified of this application, and I believe the committee received those comments yesterday from Heritage Ottawa and the Community Association. Councillor McKenney also provided comments, and those are in the report. I would like to quickly acknowledge one of the comments from Heritage Ottawa in relation to the potential conservation of elements on the interior of the Fleck House. Just to say that we agree those are significant elements, and we are having some initial conversations with the applicant and the owner about how to incorporate some of those and potentially look into amending the designation down the road. Next. So the staff recommendations are to approve the application subject to conditions, which I'll go through quickly in a second, as well as to delegate authority for minor design changes and issue the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Next. So we have recommended a few conditions and I've got them up on the screen. Number one is one that staff regularly include to ensure that the final materials that are selected by the building permit stage are consistent with the heritage approval. And number one and number two are intended to work together in a way in that if approved, staff would be looking for the applicant to follow and undertake the conservation treatments outlined in the conservation plan that was submitted as part of the application. So that would be condition number one. And condition number two builds on the conservation plan in that staff would be looking for some additional details to outline any protection measures that would be undertaken to ensure the historic house will be stabilized and protected during any work on site. So the conservation plan gets into that a bit already with recommendations to make sure the windows are boarded up and bricks are cleaned appropriately after construction. So if there's other elements that need to be stabilized or monitored, that would be something we'd be looking for in the protection plan. And we recommended that this be included as a condition of the site plan approval for review. Next. Oh, and that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for the very detailed report on this file. In terms of correspondence submitted to the clerk's office, we did receive none to date. However, we do have speakers registered on behalf of the applicant, and I understand that there is a presentation that would accompany that. And the registered speakers are Robert Martin from Robertson Martin Architects, who's the heritage architect, Murray Chowan from Novatech, a planner, and Ryan Coolwine from Project One Studio, who is an architect. So I would invite the registered speakers to give their presentation now. After that, committee members will be invited to ask questions, and then we'll move on to questions from staff or of staff.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's Murray Chown. I will provide some introductory comments followed by a brief presentation by Robert Martin, who you've already acknowledged as being the heritage consultant on this file. Mr. Coolwine is available to answer, as the project architect, is available to answer any questions that may arise from members of the committee. I actually want to start by thanking the Dalhousie Community Association and Heritage Ottawa for the comments that they provided to the committee yesterday. And Mr. Chair, I think it's regrettable if you haven't received those. The comments from both the DCA and Heritage Ottawa support the application that's before you today and acknowledge the efforts of our client and of the design team to take all the appropriate steps to ensure the protection of this very significant heritage resource in the city of Ottawa. Just to confirm for the members of the committee that our clients are dedicated to the protection and restoration of this heritage feature in the city of Ottawa, this heritage resource in the city of Ottawa. They bought this property with the full intention of restoring this building to its full glory. I'll just conclude by saying that we certainly support the recommendations of staff. I thank Ms. Kim for all of her efforts on this file, and I would confirm the conversations that she alluded to in her final comments that we will work with staff towards a future heritage designation of some of the interior features of this building once the project has been completed. With that introduction, I'll turn things over to Mr. Martin to make a brief presentation.
Thank you, Murray. I guess members of committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I don't know who's in control of the the presentation. Thank you. So I would echo Murray's comments. This particular building presents a great opportunity. This is one of the most, I think, important signature buildings in the area, and it is very intact, and a lot of the heritage features are in good condition. So that comes with great opportunity and responsibility as well. I would also like to commend Project One for their engagement with the whole team and with city staff and stakeholders. The project really was very iterative. There were quite a number of design options that were explored, and at every case, Project One was willing to, I guess, explore those. So I thank them for that. The challenge in the project definitely is one of allowing the intensification without adversely impacting the prominent location and appearance of the heritage building. Toward that end, there were a lot of viewscape analysis and sort of studies of the primary views, and so some of the actual, I guess, design or modulation of the tower component, really that sort of hinge, both echo the tower element of the existing heritage building, but also allow the views to open up toward the building. I don't know if you maybe go to the next slide. We can. Yeah. So this view, which you've seen already, is one of the most important views, and there are also other ones further to the northeast where you sort of look up toward the heritage building. But in the analysis, the building with its sort of tower element acting almost as a hinge is reflected in the actual tower itself. There were a lot of concerns about how to express the contemporary structure, and some of our input in this regard was to pay attention to, I guess, datum lines and materiality which are reflected in the current building. And in this sense, the idea is that the contemporary building is treated as a foil or a backdrop to the much more ornate and expressive heritage elements. And I think the design achieves that very well. There have been other subtle improvements for improved barrier-free access, which is really being achieved through the gasket or the link, and gives sufficient breathing space for the heritage building. I guess next, please. So these are building on some of Mackenzie's earlier images. It's a very unusual location on the escarpment overlooking the Breton Flats, and at this sort of junction between sort of the downtown and the more stable, mature residential neighborhoods. There have been a number of, I think, unfortunate residential projects in the recent decades, and some of those stand in contrast to what I think can be done here. So Ryan's team certainly looked at the massing of the topography and the views, both near and far, in their design exercises. Next, please.
1 minute left.
Okay, so we have only a few more slides. So this is a good example of how the entry to the new building is slipped between the heritage building and the new structure via this glazed link set back from the face of the building. And the I guess later additions will be removed. In our assessment, they're not of primary value. And next, please. And so the site plan, here you see the footprint, and some of the design discussions are about creating sufficient space around the building while allowing all the necessary code requirements for entry and exiting. Next. And so we have some of the elevations. Mackenzie touched on these, but these show some of the removal of the non-contributing later additions. Next. So the garage addition to the west. And next. And then some of the northerly porch structure which is not in particularly good condition or original to the house. Next.
Time.
Okay. So I think that's, I think those are our slides. So.
Well, thank you. I'd like to really thank the registered speakers for their presentation. I also want to apologize. We did get that correspondence yesterday, definitely from the Dalhousie Community Association and also from Heritage Ottawa. Just didn't catch up as quickly to my notes as we received them, but that correspondence was received and was circulated to all members before this meeting. At this time, does the subcommittee members have questions for the registered applicants? And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Martin and Mr. Chown. My question really is probably for you, Robert. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the people involved on this design, and I think it's really successful. It's great to see that it's come down in height, and I think the prominence that it gives the original house is really strong. And thank you for explaining how that relationship works and how it'll be attached through the glass entryway. But I'm just wondering about some information perhaps on how the original house is going to be used in this development. That's first part of my question. And secondly, if there is going to be, if the original entrance is going to be used at all. I know that you explained the entrance into the new development is to the side, to the west, a new glass entrance, but I'm just wondering about those elements of the original house. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may suggest, I think that Mr. Coolwine should probably answer those questions.
Sure thing, Murray. Thank you for the question, Carolyn. So the existing house is going to be subdivided. It will essentially function as a low-rise apartment building. So we're going to have 6 residential suites within the Fleck house. We paid careful attention actually to code requirements and exiting to ensure that we could remove the fire escape off the back of the building that's currently there, and make sure that we were code compliant in achieving exiting without having to add any additional elements to the outside of the heritage building. So all the exiting works either through the existing central stair, so we get to enhance an existing asset to further increase its function and prominence in the new design, and the secondary means out is actually going to be connecting through into the new building. So we're able to do all of this work without actually having to impact anything on the exterior of the existing heritage asset. In terms of access into the building, any resident who lives in the apartments in the Fleck house will be able to use the current front door to get into the building, and then as a secondary means of entry into the space, and to provide barrier-free access into that space as well. There is a connection through the new building into the existing house. So there's kind of 2 ways to get in.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. I see that Councillor Brockington also has a question.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues. I assume it's all questions now. There are no more delegations from this applicant.
But that's my option.
All questions now for the applicant?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, I'd like more details about the protection plan. I appreciate in the staff's report, they mentioned as part of the site plan, there would be a requirement to provide just that. Can I have a little more details on how the current building will be protected? Staff talked about boarding up windows, cleaning the brick, I guess, after the building is built. How do you also monitor and stabilize the foundation of the current building? And just elaborate for me how you're going to protect this building.
So I don't know who wants to take that, whether it's Ryan or Robert, but maybe we'll start with Ryan.
I think Robert would love to answer this.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. A couple comments. Heritage buildings are often at their most vulnerable when under construction because they've lost often their life safety and other protection systems and so heating and ventilation. So we've had conversations with the applicant, and I mean they're very committed to the careful retention and adaptive reuse of the existing building. So some of those details will need to be sorted out. The other thing that works to our advantage in this particular location is where the building is founded on a shelf of rock. So we actually have very good support conditions, and that actually allows the building to remain stable while the excavation for the adjacent tower is underway. So there will need to be, I guess, greater details worked out with the construction team. And I think that is one of the heritage requirements, that a protection plan be submitted as part of the next stages of approvals. We were also retained to provide a conservation plan for the building, and that does allude to some of the protection requirements before, during, and after construction. So I would say there will be some work to do with Ryan's team and the rest of the consultants, and as well with the owner, but we are mindful of that.
Just for my own understanding, is a protection plan an automatic requirement when you are in close proximity to a heritage building?
I wouldn't say it's an automatic requirement, but it's a good idea. I mean, protection plans are common in the city, regardless of whether the building is heritage or not. We often have situations where there's the potential to undermine foundations or to have health and safety debris, sort of barriers between new and existing construction. So these are not unusual for any form of construction.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. The next member who had their hand raised was Member Podolsky.
Good morning, everyone. Quite rightly, we're focused on the heritage application, and I would comment that I am quite impressed by the best practices that appear to be undertaken in the design. I have a question that maybe could be best answered by Murray Chown, and it is related to the Built Heritage Committee always having the opportunity to understand the planning context and the other planning approvals that are required. Could you just give us a little synopsis of the whether this application under the Planning Act is going to need rezoning and any other special things that would help the Built Heritage Committee understand the overall planning context?
Thank you for that question. I'm not fully prepared for it, but I'll give you the high-level response to that. So we have this process actually started with an application for rezoning to permit the what was initially proposed to be a high-rise apartment building on the property. The initial application, as I think was alluded to earlier this morning, was for 17 stories. As a result of comments received on the initial circulation, both from staff, the community association, and the ward councillor, the project was significantly reduced in scale from a high-rise building to what technically is now a mid-rise building at 9 stories, but it still requires a rezoning. So that the recommendations coming forward from this subcommittee when it comes to Planning Committee on February 11th, on that same day, there will be a recommendation with respect to the application for rezoning. There, of course, is also a concurrent application for site plan approval where we're dealing with all of the details with respect to landscaping, parking, how to deal with that noise wall that Ms. Kim referenced in her presentation. So we have effectively 3 concurrent applications underway: rezoning, site plan, and the heritage permit application.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. It's always valuable, at least for me, to understand the planning applications that need to that are being processed. And just as an aside, I noticed, maybe quite rightly or wrongly, that there is no underground parking except for a couple of visitor parking spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. All that's being proposed is 2 surface parking spaces where there already is parking on the site today.
Good customers for our LRT system.
That's the plan.
Thank you for that. And the next person who has their hand raised is Member Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to keep my camera off because I'm having connectivity issues this morning and it seems to work a little better. But I wanted to inquire about 2 smaller elements that have appeared in the renderings and as part of staff's presentation, as well as the architects. The first is the noise fencing. Now, I understand that you're still working through the finer details, but have you any idea of the height and materiality and how you could potentially incorporate that into the aesthetic that you've developed for the rest of the site?
I'll let Mr. Coolwine answer that question. It's been evolving since the initial application.
Right. So the noise fencing is a requirement because we have an amenity space that abuts Bronson Avenue. And so there's decibel level requirements for any space that's meant for gathering to serve as an amenity for the building. So that required the installation of this noise fence. We've been trying very hard to come up with a planting solution that could replace any kind of physical construction. However, we originally proposed, a concrete wall, let's say, with board form concrete to give a textured look to play off of the existing heritage retaining wall. At the city's suggestion, a heritage planning suggestion, we've changed this to a wood noise barrier. So this, to be clear, this is, it's typical to a wood fence, only the thickness of the boards that we're using, we just a thicker buildup of wood with tight gaps in between to ensure that the sound that transfers through. And then, as was mentioned in the presentation, the plan is to plant it with ivy so that we do get a softer impact and we have some vegetation going up the fence. If all things were perfect, we would rather not have that barrier there either. But it's a requirement, and that requirements transcends, I believe, zoning bylaw and also provincial regulations.
I just wanted to note that in terms of views of the building and views of the turret from Bronson Avenue, there currently is a lilac hedge along that property line. So the noise barrier that's being required to protect that amenity space isn't obstructing any of the current views of the building, but we are going to make best efforts to soften the impact of that wall.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, when we were last on site, we did a couple quick measures, and the height of the noise barrier is actually shorter than the height of the existing shrubs that currently exist on top of the retaining wall.
Thank you very much. My second question is aesthetically driven. I noticed in your renderings you have some lighting playing off the heritage building. Is there a plan to incorporate some kind of aesthetic lighting into the actual site?
Could you clarify what you mean by aesthetic lighting?
Lighting that would accentuate the architectural features. For example, on the new train station, or I guess the historic train station and new home of the Senate, you have lighting that's been set up to amplify the presence of the pillars. Would you be looking to light the building to sort of draw out the heritage prominence at night at all, or?
I mean, lighting design is certainly some exercise that we go through once we get into more technical drawings. It's definitely something that we'll be looking at. We haven't resolved any details of that just yet. Lighting the building itself is always a delicate issue to navigate, because we want to be very mindful of the way that we're controlling light and the directions that we're casting. So, you know, a traditional way to accentuate like a heritage asset, let's say, would be to uplight the building just to really make it shine at night. But the issue we've got there is just, you know, how we're casting light and how we're directing it upwards, and we're trying to limit those practices. So, a short answer would be that we will absolutely look to enhance the presence of the Fleck House at night through lighting. We haven't resolved a lighting plan just yet.
Thank you. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you so much for that. And we have one last raised hand, and that's Member Conforti.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by thanking staff, thanking Mackenzie for her presentation, and congratulating the applicants for a very thorough application. I was actually interested, you guys touched on it a little bit, how you worked to sort of get that spacing correct between the existing heritage building and the new build. I'm curious because I think removal of the later additions, the north and west additions, has a very positive impact, and it reveals the turret again. But then the new build is quite close to that turret. So I'm just wondering how you came to the decision of the relationship between the existing and the line of the new building, and how you're hoping to mitigate some of that negative impact of revealing the turret again, but then sort of enclosing it in a different way. I would say a less negative way, definitely, than those two later additions that you're removing. But I just wanted to see if you had any more sort of development or comments on that.
Sure. Just to facilitate comments on this, would it be possible to bring up a site plan from the presentation?
While that's happening, Ryan, could I comment something too?
Sure.
I also want to say one of the very interesting discussions we had on the project was treating the tower as this almost element of delight, and how one might experience it from different vantage points. So in a kind of narrow, compressed way at the glazed link looking up, and then also in terms of the circulation corridors within the building looking down on it, and similarly from the amenity space. So the tower was seen as this element of texture, heritage texture, that one could experience from many different vantage points. And I think that's partly what the placement of the new building is designed to do. And anyway, I'll hand it back to Ryan.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, Robert. So there was a few things that we did as the design progressed, and we got our first round of comments back. Part of the concern from city's perspective was just, how close we were to the north property line originally. So in the original application, we were within 1.5 meters of the property line towards on the left-hand side of the page, which pushes the building quite close actually to the abutting property to the north. And so we wanted to see a little bit of separation there, and that kind of just began a discussion about, well, if we're, if we're shifting the building away from that north property line, it's going to require that we move a little bit closer to the building than we were before. And that was something that we worked through with heritage staff. And so that does create a bit more of a pinch point with the turret from, looking at it from the top of the page down. At the same time, we've decided really to treat this as more of kind of an amenity space as well, right? So, I mean, the view, let's say, gets cut off if we go all the way down to Bronson, but as we climb Bronson towards Laurier, there's still views of that turret that we made clear in the renderings. I do want to highlight too, like you can see in where the dash line is on this plan, that the base of the turret currently is completely covered. All you really have access or views of is the very top. And so the turret in its entirety is going to be visible. The other thing that we worked on was the spacing between the new building and the existing building towards the entry. So we've actually widened that gap in turning it into the main entry, and that's a completely glazed enclosure for the atrium. So when you're approaching the building, you're actually going to be able to see clear through the atrium and get a view of that turret. So even from the street, you'd be able to get these glancing views of the turret. And then once you're in this space, which is the main space of arrival for the building and the space that has connection points through, you're going to have views of the turret as well. And the inside edge, so the face of the new building that faces the flag house is actually the circulation space. So on the lower levels, as you're walking down the corridor, you're actually going to be walking around. It's fully glazed. You're going to have views of that turret as well. Finally, what we were also doing is on the ground floor, we're using that turret space as actually amenity space for both for residents of the rehabilitated flag house and the new building. So we're physically going to be occupying that space, and every resident's going to have access to that. So from a visual perspective and from a functional perspective, we really feel like we're doing that turret justice and placing the importance that it really deserves.
Great, thank you. That answers my question. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And the ward councillor, Catherine McKinney, has raised their hand.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff. And I do want to thank the applicant today. This is going to be, in the end, one of those win-win-win situations. And I have to say, I know that we started off with renderings that the community was concerned about, I was concerned about, but the work that the applicant did with the community association, the surrounding community, really, I really do want to emphasize the difference that made in moving forward. And quite frankly, what we have in front of us today is, I think an application that will restore probably, if not the most important home in the downtown, heritage home in the downtown, the Andrew Fleck House, that is so prominently displayed up there on Laurier, overlooking the Ottawa River and and the downtown to the east. It will also help to intensify the downtown. Yes, having new customers for LRT, for those bike lanes on Laurier. It's a wonderful neighborhood that is so close to everything. I think we could call it a 10-minute neighborhood rather than a 15. But so we have the restoration and the saving this beautiful home. More people living in the downtown, which is what we want to see, and that fronting onto Laurier, which I think that we forget about that little piece of Laurier sometimes, that one block, but it is very residential, and this building, adds to that, will bring life to that part of Laurier, actually. So the fronting on, the step back, and the fronting onto the street, the way that you have with the red brick and the entrance where it is just very, very friendly towards the street. I think in the end it will go down as one of those. I think it was Councillor Moffat texted me and said this is similar to what happened with Friday's Roast Beef House on Laurier, or on Elgin, and we look at that and think, wow, we could have never had it any other way. And I think that someday we're going to look at this and say, wow, we could have never had it any other way. So thank everyone, thank staff, thank you very much to the applicant. And to the community that worked hard and gave weeks of input into this, but in the end we have an outcome that I think we can be pretty proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'd like to thank the deputants for their presentation. Does the committee have any questions specifically for staff? And I see that Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mackenzie. Really excellent. I do have just a question, just because it has arisen with other developments. It's pertaining to the glass materials on the new addition and whether there's going to be any effort to introduce some bird protection. I know this isn't a heritage issue specifically, but it is arising increasingly with developments associated with heritage buildings and not. So just a question on that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Quinn. It's not really a heritage issue, but I think certainly it's a conversation that we can have through the site plan application. My colleague Andrew McCreight is on the call today. I'm not sure if it's come up before in the discussions to this point. It might also be a question for the applicant if they can jump in, if it's something they've thought of already.
Perhaps they're getting a coffee.
I was going to say, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, did you want me to speak to that item? It's Andrew McCreight. I'm the file lead on the other planning applications for the zoning and site plan.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And it's an excellent question. It's certainly a topic that has come up in conversation and in comments, certainly from members of the community as well as staff. As Mackenzie alluded to, it's really more of an item that can be controlled through site plan. That type of detail is really lies within the site plan application, not necessarily the heritage or zoning. So we don't have full answers yet on what it will include. I have seen correspondence from the applicant team that they're looking into different measures of what could be incorporated from the bird safe guidelines that are recently passed. But those details are still being looked at and worked through as we move through the site plan process. So conversations, okay. Yes, outcome unknown yet.
Thank you. Thank you for entertaining that non-heritage question. Mackenzie, also, you mentioned at the beginning that you're working with the owner about the possibility of retaining certain interior elements of the building, which I'm really happy to hear. Having been in and out of that building myself personally for many, many years, I can attest to the quality of that interior. And so that is really good news, and especially if certain elements could actually be added to the Part 4 designation. I'd also like to just take this opportunity again to congratulate everyone on this project, but also to just mention, I know this is the Andrew Fleck House, built by Mr. Fleck in 1902 and owned up until the early 1940s. But after that, the house was owned by the McCord family and its descendants for over 80 years. And I think I just would like to say, get on record, excuse me, just how well they invested and preserved that property for that time. So I believe that they sold that house to the current owner, and it's the quality the retention of the interior and the quality of the elements, right down to the new roof being replaced with slate. Big investment there, and so really a dedication and a love of that house over the years. And I think I'd just like to get on record that the McCord family and its descendants we need to tip our hats to them. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for the question and for the wonderful observation. I did have one brief question, noting that nobody else has their hands up for staff. And it's just maybe a brief examination or some brief comments about the protective measures that will be put in place by the city as this project goes forward to ensure that the designated building is protected during that construction process. So that's just my brief question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Robert Martin answered that question earlier, quite well. He spoke to how the existing property, given that the existing property is built on the type of the geography of the property lends itself quite well to in terms of stabilization. He spoke to, at what points the building is its most vulnerable. So I think we will be working quite closely with the applicant and their consultant team, and certainly their engineers, through the site plan and prior to their building permit, to just outline those details. And I think there's some more discussion certainly to be had. But it's an important part going forward. And I know the applicant is, there's a lot of interest and a love for this building. So I think it's a good piece to have as part of the approval.
Wonderful. Those efforts are much appreciated. And I see one last question has come in for staff from member Podolsky.
It's not so much a question, Chair King, but it's an overall comment that I would like to make in advance of your asking us to provide our comments.
Yes,
and
I was actually going to ask members if they had any other comments on this item. So we might as well just move to that section. I do know that obviously the ward councillor has submitted some comments, so we might as well just move to that, to comments.
Thank you. And I'd like to echo Councillor McKenney's compliments to not just the community associations and the applicant and staff, but to say how happy I am that we can launch 2021 series of meetings of the Built Heritage Subcommittee with what appears to be an emerging success story. I think that this is an exemplary approach, not just in terms of the design and the conservation plan, but the whole way in which the consultation has evolved with community input and Heritage Ottawa input. I think it's important to share positive things like this verbally at meetings like this, because often we get down into arm wrestling over why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that. And I think that I would just like to launch the 2021 season of heritage applications with my genuine compliments for all the players that are involved. And I, of course, will be supporting the staff report on this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that comment, and I would like to echo that as well. I don't see any other hands up on the notion of comments, but I'm also very supportive of this application. I think it's very thoughtful, and it's an excellent example of adaptive reuse of really how a property can be conserved and integrated into a project that provides increased density and continued residential use of the designated building itself, which I think is very important and something that isn't often seen. So I'm very excited about this project. The other element that I'm excited about was hearing Councillor McKinney's comments about the cooperation between the community and the applicant and seeking a better result. And that's what we're always striving for, hopefully, when we're around these tables. So I am very supportive of this item. We'll be supporting it. And I will ask, is this report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Yes, carried.
Thank you so much.
Carried.
Excellent. The next item, number 2, is an application to alter 100 Argyle Avenue, property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one's also mine. So Eric, if we can bring up the presentation for 100 Argyle. Perfect. So this next application is an application to alter. It relates to the property at 100 Argyle Avenue. If we go to the next slide, it's a property designated as part of the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. As you can see on the map, it's located on the south side of Argyle between Metcalfe and Elgin Streets at the southern boundary of the HCD. Next. The property contains a 2-story masonry office building with a service parking lot at the side and the rear. The building was constructed in 1955 as the purpose-built headquarters for the Canadian Labour Congress, and it includes a 1960s addition that's attributed to the firm of Gilland and Strutt architects. The building features a modernist style limestone clad facade with brick cladding for the remaining elevations and wings. This property is considered a Category 2 property within the Centertown HCD. Next. In terms of context, the property is located directly adjacent to the Ottawa Police Headquarters on its east side, and across the street to the north is the Canadian Museum of Nature and its surrounding landscape grounds, which of course is a National Historic Site of Canada. Next. So the current proposal for this property is to construct a 10-story apartment building with amenity space and storage on the ground floor, as well as 2 levels of underground parking. The proposal will entail the removal of most of the existing building, which is the yellow area on the image on the left, but its front facade and the front portion with its returns, shown here in bold, will be retained and integrated into the new construction as the new lobby and main entrance. So this will involve careful dismantling, recording, and reconstructing this portion of the building, but its location will be shifted slightly to the east on the lot, and that's shown on the site plan on the right on the screen in red. So the construction of the new building will also result in the removal of the existing parking lot and improved landscaping with new street trees and foundation plantings along the front facade. The detailed landscape plans and also lighting plans have not yet been finalized, so staff have recommended that these be submitted as a condition of the site plan that's required to facilitate this application. Next, please. So these are the front and rear elevations of the proposal. The new building is organized in 3 sections with the reinstated limestone clad base, the brown clad middle section, and the tower with an ochre colored brick cladding. The middle section features larger rectangularly spaced windows with a more traditional solid to void ratio, while the upper portion has taller, narrower windows. The mechanical penthouse is clad in gray metal panels, and that's in an effort to help it be as discreet as possible. Next, please. So these are the side elevations. The reinstated facade will maintain the existing front yard setback on Argyle, and the building is articulated by the balconies and setting back the middle section further than the tower, and that gives the building a bit of a floating appearance. So I already mentioned that a site plan application is required, excuse me, for this proposal, as well as an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, and those applications will be considered together with this report at the next planning committee. Next. So Heritage staff are recommending approval of this application for a combination of the following reasons. First, a key consideration was to mitigate the potential impacts of this new construction on the Museum of Nature. The applicant has lowered the height of the proposal. It did originally come in at 21 stories, and it's come down to 10. And that's in an effort to provide better transition to the height of the museum across the street. Additionally, step backs above the base and recessed balconies with glass guards help provide visual and massing relief. Next. As well, the overall contemporary style of the new building is distinguishable from that of the Beaux-Arts form and Tudor Gothic elements of the museum, but with subtle details such as the chosen cladding materials and window patterns, which are meant to visually connect the 2 buildings. Next. The second key consideration for this proposal was the conservation of the overall heritage value of 100 Argyle. So as I mentioned, the building was constructed as the headquarters for the Canadian Labour Congress. And as outlined in the Heritage Impact Statement that was submitted in support of the application, there's archival research that indicates the building was designed to have a facade that had greater importance and prominence than the rest of the building. And that was to acknowledge the relationship with the museum. So those archival documents also strongly indicate that the facade was designed by James Strutt, who was a well-known architect known for his modernist works, and whose firm designed the 1960s addition to this building. So through the retention of the facade, the proposal retains and rehabilitates the portion of the building which was historically the most prominent, and the historical association with Strutt that will continue. So the facade will be shifted slightly to the east. However, it will maintain the existing front setback and that relationship with the museum. Staff have recommended a condition that relates to the documentation of the existing building as it stands today, which follows best practice in heritage conservation to document all interventions to historic properties so that the information will be available in the future. Next, please. The facade at the base will also be set forward from the upper portions of the building, and that helps it to remain the focal point at the pedestrian level. Efforts have also been made to relate the new construction to the historic facade by aligning windows and choosing similar colored materials, and also by balancing its overall proportion. In order to provide universal accessibility to the completed project, the proposal does include removal of the front steps, the door sill, and the bottom 2 feet of the facade and its doorway in order to lower it to grade to match the interior floor levels. The granite door surrounds and the window wells will be retained and reinstated, and staff are of the opinion that these represent an appropriate solution that balances accessibility while preserving the character defining attributes of the building. Next, please. The third major consideration for this project was to ensure the work would be undertaken carefully and minimize risk to the facade. As part of this, the applicant and their and their team have already undertaken comprehensive recording and documentation, and also a detailed methodology for the project, and that's outlined in the conservation plan. The implementation of this methodology has been recommended as a condition of the heritage permit. Additionally, given the risk associated with the proposal, staff are recommending that the owner provide a letter of credit in an amount equal to the estimated cost to replace and reconstruct the facade in the event of any damage or unforeseen circumstances. And this letter of credit would be required prior to any building permits, and would be held by the city until the reconstruction is complete. Next, please. So finally, of course, the fourth major consideration was to ensure the cultural heritage value of Centertown would be conserved. And staff have reviewed the application using the Centertown H-City guidelines for residential infill. The proposed development meets those guidelines as the design is contemporary, but also sympathetic to the heritage character of the area. The retention of the historic facade, the proposed window design and pattern, and the material palette are also consistent with the surrounding properties, which help it blend with its context. Staff have recommended a condition to provide final exterior cladding samples, and that's to ensure that the final selection will also meet those guidelines. The proposed height is taller than than the established character of this area, also the museum and the direction in the HCD guidelines. However, in general, staff are supportive of the proposed height given its location near the 417, the mitigation measures implemented, and also the improved cohesive streetscape through the removal of the parking lot. Next. So staff have reviewed this proposal against Parks Canada's standards and guidelines and determined it generally meets those, and the most applicable ones are on the screen. Despite the negative impact of the demolition of a large portion of the building, the overall proposal generally meets standards 1, 10, and 11 because the heritage value and attributes of the existing building and the Centertown HCD are conserved. The impacts to the museum have been mitigated, and the design of the new building will be compatible with its surrounding context. Next. Just quickly here, staff have also reviewed the applicable guidelines in the Centertown Community Design Plan and are satisfied that the proposal will be consistent with those guidelines. Next. In terms of consultation, this application has followed the Heritage Planning Branch's standard notification procedures, and those are outlined on the screen. Councillor McKinney has provided comments and they were incorporated into the report. And since the original original proposal that actually came in back in 2018. The applicant has worked closely with their office on this file through the associated planning processes. This project was also reviewed by the Urban Design Review Panel, and their comments have been incorporated into the design. So in conclusion, staff are, if we go to the next slide, sorry. Staff are recommending conditional approval of the application to delegate minor design changes and issue the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. And if we go one more slide, Eric, please. So the recommended approval would be subject to the proposed conditions related to finalizing landscaping and lighting and providing cladding samples, the implementation of the conservation plan measures, documenting the existing building, and providing a letter of credit for the protection and conservation of the facade while the work is undertaken. And if we go one more. Thank you. That's all my slides, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, once again for another detailed report. We have not to date received correspondence that has been submitted to the clerk's office. However, we do have a number of registered speakers from the applicant who include Kevin Reed of RLA Architecture, John Stewart of Commonwealth Historic Resource Management, Bonnie Martell of Colonnade Bridgeport, and Scott Alain of Fortin. They do not have a presentation, but are available to respond to the questions of subcommittee. So does subcommittee have any questions for the applicant? And I'm not seeing hands raised. So does the subcommittee have any questions for staff? And I do see a question from Councillor McKinney.
Actually, Chair, it's just I just wanted to make comment. I see Jen has put up her hand, so I'll let her go ahead, but I'd just like to make comment to wrap up.
Sure. So Member Hassel.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question for staff on this one. I know the building is 10 stories taller than the others on the street, but what is the tallest building on this section of Argyle that's facing the museum to date? My understanding just from street view is that they tend to be 3 and 4 stories, but has staff confirmed?
Thank you for the question. I think you would be correct, Member Hassel. Typically, the buildings along Argyle would be low, you know, between 2 and 4, I would say, directly adjacent. But sort of as the museum is framed, there are some taller, more mid-rise buildings, and as you move further, kind of towards O'Connor, they are taller, more even taller than that. I'm not sure the exact heights there.
Okay. Could you refresh my memory as to what the current zoning allowance is here and what the community design plan calls for in terms of height?
My colleague Simon Diaco is the file lead for the associated planning applications, and I believe he's on the call today. He might be able to speak a bit more articulately to the variances and OPA and zoning bylaw applications.
Hi, good morning, members of committee. The application that I'm dealing with is for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. This site in the secondary plan is designated for a mid-rise building, which is up to 9 stories. We of course are dealing with a 10-story building, and that's facilitating the need for that amendment to the secondary plan. But as part of that larger Centertown secondary plan exercise, the current zoning never was amended to reflect the policy direction. So that is why we need that zoning amendment as well. And it will capture that building at 10 stories, which is, you know, a slight deviation from the Centertown secondary plan. But just to build a little more on Mackenzie's comments as well, this south side of Argyle Street is designated as a mid-rise typology. There are some new projects. I mean, recently new, if we look at the Beaver Bear site, that did incorporate that that policy direction, and we're satisfied with the proposal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I believe that Councillor McKenney has a comment.
I do. I did want to wrap up. It's not every day that I come to committee happy with everything in front of me for my ward, but here we are. This is another example of a win-win. This is one where I actually, from the beginning, wanted it to work. I think when we saw the original renderings of it, felt that the height was a bit high. This is a transition street. Argyle is a transition street, and needed to be kept that way. But with 10 stories, this is also, I suppose, what you would term facadism, but it's good facadism because this building is just really the panels that have any real heritage, cultural value. So that's being maintained. It really will, this development really will retain the character of 100 Argyle as it is today, as well as the surrounding heritage conservation district, and its relationship to the museum as well is vitally important in the the materials and the shapes of the windows. Everything that went into this building really complement its relationship to the museum. It's such an important landmark as well, very different than what we dealt with in the last application, which is kind of up on a hill where everyone can see it. This is tucked away, but it's again across the street from again one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. So again, thank you to staff for persevering, to the applicant for continuing to work with us, I think what we have in front of us again will animate that part of Argyle. I remember the early renderings where you could see the lobby and how well lit it was, and I know I had many residents in the area who wanted to see it happen, wanted us to find a way to make it happen, and I think that with your work, both staff and the applicant, you found a way to make this happen. So this will be a real bonus to the street and to the downtown. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKinney. I know that feeling when things go well in one meeting, you're like, what's actually happened? This doesn't usually occur, but I do appreciate those comments, and I do see that Member Podolsky has potentially comments or questions of staff.
Thank you, Chair. These are comments, and following Catherine McKenney's lead here, and my comment really has to do with the broader picture of the museum precinct and how I think that this building and the incorporation of the historic entrance will support the character and the primacy of the Museum of Nature. I say that having spent 10 years of my life in the conservation and adaptive reuse of the Canadian Museum of Nature, so I feel that I'm a living neighbor there in Councillor's ward. So I think that if we imagine the south side of the museum along Argyle as a series of mid-rise buildings, as Simon Diaco has shared with us, that is part of the secondary official plan, I think we can begin to see how the monumentality of the Museum of Nature and the open space around it will indeed be supported and enhanced by, let's say, background buildings of a scale that are complementary to the museum. And I think this is a very, very positive thing. And I wanted to just share my observations with the members of the community, and the applicant and the consultants. One thing which I would just like to remind both the planners and the applicant, when it comes to the lighting design, the exterior lighting design, please remember when you visit the museum precinct that the late Phil Gabriel was the mastermind of the lighting of the museum, and his vision for it was of a moonlit monument, a moonlit heritage kind of landmark. And let's make sure that the lighting of the buildings around respect that and don't overwhelm it. There's a real benefit to calm and measured appreciation of our neighborhoods without necessarily doing theatrical highlighting. So that's just a comment that I'd like to share. And then one day, Councillor Kenny and other councillors, we will get together with the museum and really complete the museum park that will benefit both the museum and the surrounding buildings, which includes the removal of the Metcalf extension. But I've gone beyond what I should be appropriately saying here. So thank you for indulging me, Chair King.
Well, we're always happy to give you the latitude, Barry. I'd like to actually echo those sentiments and also correct the record. We did receive once again correspondence from Heritage Ottawa on this item, and I found myself in complete agreement with their assessment that this application represents a design which is more compatible with the Museum of Nature, especially considering the reduced height of the building in this application. As a consequence, I am happy to support it. So is this report, seeing no other hands raised on comments, is this report carried?
Carried.
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 This report is scheduled to be presented to Planning Committee on February 11th, 2021. The next item is number 3, status update, Built Heritage Subcommittee inquiries and motions for the period ending January 8th, 2021. This is pretty pro forma documentation that goes between us and the Office of the City Clerk. There are no registered speakers to date on this item and no correspondence. Does the committee have any questions for staff on this item? Seeing no hands raised, is this report received?
Received.
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 This information report is not rising to Planning Committee or Council. We do have an additional item, number 4, addition of 5 de Obelets Avenue to the City of Ottawa Heritage Register. There is no presentations, no registered speakers, but we did receive correspondence from John H. Smith Consulting for Domicile Developments dated January 19th, opposing consideration of the motion and addition of this property to the Heritage Register. I understand that Councillor Menard is requesting that the committee consider a motion to recommend that council add 15 de Obelets Avenue to the City of Ottawa Heritage Register. Before the committee can consider this matter, it must first move to add the item to the agenda. Is there a member who will move this motion?
I'll move the motion, Chair. It's Councillor McKinney.
Excellent. So is the motion to add the item to the agenda carried?
Carried.
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 The motion is being moved by Councillor McKinney on behalf of the ward councillor, Councillor Menard. Could the ward councillor please introduce the motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'll go through it and explain some of the more complicated history with this one as well at the end of it, and a slight change to the motion to recognize the letter that was received yesterday as well. So we're now, well, be it resolved that Built Heritage Subcommittee consider pursuant to section 89.3, the rules of procedure, motion to recommend the addition of 15 des Oblats Avenue to the Heritage Register to ensure that the subject building with heritage significance is protected in Capital Ward. Whereas the Heritage Planning Branch has confirmed that the Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus Convent 15 des Oblats Avenue is a building that meets the design test and reflects the heritage attributes listed in the Neighborhood Heritage Statement for Old Ottawa East, satisfying the Heritage Inventory Project criteria for listing on the Heritage Register. Whereas this property was unintentionally omitted from the 2017 staff report, Heritage Inventory Project, additions to Heritage Register, Old Ottawa East and Old Ottawa South. Whereas the community submitted a request on January 12th, 2021 to add the property to the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register. And whereas there is no notification requirement under the Ontario Heritage Act for listing properties under the Heritage Register, therefore be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Council, 1, approve the addition of 15 des Oblats Avenue to the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register under section 27(1.2) of the Ontario Heritage Act, and 2, direct staff to review the property to determine if it meets the criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And be it further resolved that this matter rise to Council for consideration at its February 10th, 2021 meeting. And so, Chair, if I can just introduce it, that last point of the addition to the February 10th, 2021 meeting allows some more time for consideration. There is some time constraints with this, and I'll explain. I'll explain why. It's a bit of a complicated history here. The former Sœurs de Sacré-Cœur convent was built in 1902 and currently has no status under the Ontario Heritage Act. My understanding is that the property was not added to the register during the citywide inventory project because it was confused with another property on the site that had an approved development application. The Old Ottawa East Community Association Board passed a motion in favor of adding this just recently. And the reason why they did that is that there's a condition for demolition on the sale of the building. The building's now for sale, and there's a condition of demolition there, which spurred this discussion around this and people thinking that it couldn't be demolished and some thinking it could. And so it had a discussion quickly. And so if we don't take action soon, then the building could be demolished without any review. My view is that this would not be a necessarily designated building, but certainly to have it on the register is important. And staff did let the owners know that it could be nominated to get listed on the Heritage Register at any point, and that the condition of demolition on the sale of the building was really what spurred this action. So our motion supports the effort given the time pressure, and without it, the building would presumably be sold before the timing that could allow for this, and potentially demolished before the city has a chance to consider the heritage value. That's why the motion's in front of you today, and why we're bringing it to the February 10th council meeting rather than the January 27th council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Does the committee have any questions on this motion? And I do see that Councillor Brockington has raised his hand first.
Thank you, Chair. Can staff comment, please, on this motion?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So staff have worked with Councillor Menard on this motion, and we are supportive of it. As was mentioned, we have received a request from the community to add this property to the city's Heritage Register. It would have normally been considered in the next sort of bulk register report, which would likely have been in April or May. But given the councillors' concerns about the proposed sale of the property, we've reviewed the property to determine whether or not it meets the criteria for listing, and we do believe that it was missed, unintentionally omitted from the 2017 review of Ottawa East. When we look back at our records, we have photos of the building and we have some history on the building, but for some reason it didn't make it in to our evaluation. So a little bit of human error there. And staff do believe that it meets the criteria from the Heritage Inventory Project for listing.
Thank you for that. Chair, I missed your opening comment. Did you say that, and maybe staff can confirm this, the property owner has been given a heads up, sufficient time to reflect on what's being proposed? Did you mention that they were supportive, or can staff just confirm that they are aware?
I'll let staff comment on the status.
Sure.
As is mentioned in the motion, Mr. Chair, there are no requirements for notice under the Heritage Act. While it is the city's practice, of course, to provide notice to owners prior to listing, it isn't a requirement. So we did notify the owner this week that this motion might be on the agenda, and they have submitted a letter, which I believe the committee coordinator has distributed to the members, asking for it to not be considered today, and that it not be considered at all, in fact. So that is the approach we've taken.
Is there a reason why they're not here this morning?
My understanding, Mr. Chair, is that the applicant's representative, or sorry, the owner's representative had a previous commitment that they were unable to break to be here today, which is why they sent a letter.
So Chair, first of all, I'm disappointed to hear there's no obligation to inform a property owner that their property is going to be considered on, like, I don't understand that. Are you saying there's no obligation to inform a property owner that the property could be considered for the heritage listing?
I can answer that, Mr. Chair. At this point in time, the Ontario Heritage Act does not have any requirements for notice. That being said, the city does have a practice that we notify owners in advance, and we notify them again after the property has been listed.
So there's past practice that when people have asked to have more time to consider what is being considered by this committee, we have granted that. But I'm also cognizant of the concern that Councillor Menard has that this project is moving forward and it is time sensitive. And so I want to give the property owner fair consideration, but I don't want to stall what I think needs to happen. And so it's unfortunate that this would come forward with the property owner not being able to be here, particularly when they appear to be objecting. So I want to know whether this is something that the committee can consider at a future meeting. I would like to hear from Councillor Menard. I don't want to put roadblocks up, but I just think in the fairness of time, we have to hear from both sides. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Menard.
Sure, I can comment, Chair. I think Councillor Brockington is right. I mean, the idea would have been to potentially give notice of motion at this meeting and have it come forward at February for the February discussion, but that February meeting has now been canceled. And so the concern is the timing. And so if there is a risk that the property could be demolished without any protection whatsoever or review, and that's the concern is the timing of it. So I agree with you, and I'm open to solutions to that, which is, I mean, that's one of the reasons why this could have gone to the January 27th council meeting. We've instead said, no, let's take it to the February 10th meeting instead, which staff had suggested that to me in this process, and that does make sense. So, you know, I'm open to solutions on it, but just wanting to give you the full picture of where we're at. So I'm not clear on how quickly this could potentially be demolished. If we could have time to go to the March meeting, for example, I'd be open to that, but I'm not clear if that's the case or not.
So just so I'm clear, that the rationale about going to a later council meeting is just to give more time for the property owner to react if that was required?
Yes, that's correct. To be able to get more submissions in or have more discussion. So that would be fine, you know, to have that discussion in advance of that meeting.
Okay. given all the all the contributing factors to this discussion, I will support the motion. It will give time for the property owner to reach out and allow us to debate this at council if it needs to be. But I do understand the time concerns that Councillor Menard has articulated, and I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Brockington. I do see that Member Podolsky has his hand raised as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have carefully read the letter from the representative for Domicile, John Smith, and there are some allegations in there that have not been brought forward to the committee verbally as we're discussing this. One of them is that the applicant apparently got reassurances from Heritage staff that Heritage staff would never be interested in making a recommendation for designation under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. I don't think that the listing is as much of an issue as whether or not the community or staff will now reconsider what apparently were commitments that there was no interest in making a recommendation for designation under Part 4. So before going any further, or even before supporting the staff recommendation, I would really like to hear from Heritage staff. Would you be kind enough to please, Leslie, just to speak to this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I was just quickly reviewing the letter again. I didn't see in there that that had been a commitment that was made at some point in time. Perhaps you're referring to the comment where Mr. Smith notes that staff advised him that there would be no action taken at this time. And that was basically that I had discussed with him in the fall and advised him that we believed that it had been missed during the Heritage Inventory project, and that, you know, that there was some community interest in the property, and that if we did receive a request, we would be looking at it. I do not believe that there has ever been a commitment, a specific commitment that this property would never be designated under Part 4, as that is a council decision. And it hasn't been evaluated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, which is Part 2 of Councillor Menard's motion, is to ask staff to review it under Regulation 0906. So I can't answer that fully, as if that commitment did occur, it may have been from staff that are no longer here. I don't know. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Well, if I may, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable in that we have just commended the developers and community on 2 other applications for a full consultation process. And I think that I would be very hesitant to rush something through like this, you know, putting it on the list, even though listing is not a onerous status for a building. There's 60 days for the period of research that can be accommodated. But the fact that this has come so quickly and that we don't have representation of the owner or their consultants here to speak as to why it should not be you know, listed, I'm very uncomfortable with that in terms of due process. So I can't, in all conscience, support the motion to put this on the list the way it's been phrased right now. Much, I think we would serve ourselves much more wholly and transparently if there's possibility to get the owner to find a way to not proceed with the demolition if they have a permit in, but to put it to the next meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee so that we can actually have a full discussion about our processes of designation and putting things on the Heritage Register.
Thank you for that comment, and I do see that Councillor Menard wants to respond.
Yeah, I do think that I agree with you, and that's the process I want to head in. The issue was how long we would have in terms of an option to not demolish it if they did submit a request to demolish. How long we would have. Now I'm hearing back from staff just now that with regard to demolition control, we would likely have enough time to give notice today and have it come forward at a future meeting. So I just got that information right now. If that is the case, by all means, I would much prefer that, to have this give proper due process and not have the building at risk of being taken down. So it seems that that's the case, and I'll work with the developer and consultant on this some more in advance of that meeting on the process side of it to ensure that is the case. So I think, Chair, with your indulgence, just receiving this information literally right now, it probably makes sense to give notice of motion if we can on this, and leave it for the next meeting. I know February was canceled, but it would be, I think it's the March 10th or early March meeting. So that likely makes more sense at this point, if with the chair's concurrence, if that would be helpful.
I think I'll make comment on that after hearing from additional members who have raised their hands. And I know that Councillor Moffat has raised his virtual hand.
Thanks. I mean, it seems that the conversation is going a certain way, but I was just going to suggest that if there's, the dual concern is that you could have demolition occur without any action taken. And then the reverse of that is that we're proceeding with looking into designation without having the opportunity to hear from the property owner. I wonder if you just wouldn't consider separating the two items, actually approve the addition to the Heritage Register today. So then you actually have that, sort of squared away in the event that something between now and when our next meeting is, that a demolition permit is sought. And then you actually defer the discussion on the second item to a future meeting to have that discussion later. So it buys you that time. It gives you that sort of, sober second thought, so to speak, on the Heritage Register aspect, but then we don't actually go any further in terms of exploring destination without having additional conversation here at committee.
And I saw that Vice Chair Quinn also raised her hand.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that comment, Scott. I like it. But I just wanted to go back to Councillor Menard with reference to the time that you just were alerted to around demolition. Can you actually share the details of that?
Yes. And I'm sorry, this is more happening it's happening in real time, but it seems that a specific application for demolition control would still take several months, and in a normal practice, a new building would have to be approved on that site, though that has been waived in the past. So it would have to go through a formal process, of which the timing is unclear to me, of how many months that could take or how many weeks that could take. So I'm just sort of going on good faith here that, given the situation, we would have the ability to consider this at the March meeting without it having been removed before that time. I don't have the specific timelines. I don't think there are specific timelines, but I believe they'd have to submit something requires that a new building be proposed and approved before that demolition would occur. So.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Councillor Moffat has made a very good suggestion that we just remove the second part of the motion. I think that we have on several occasions, this committee has reassured concerned property owners that having their property added to the Heritage Register does not automatically mean that the building is going to be designated under the Ontario Heritage Act or aspect of the property. So I think that maintaining the consistency of that message today would allow us to, in good faith, add it, recommend its addition to the register, and remove, as Scott said, the second item. And I think that you know, we have, in a sense, heard from the owner quite a detailed letter. So I don't feel really concerned that they haven't had the opportunity at all to share their concerns. But even for myself, I appreciate the contents of that letter. But again, as we've said to other property owners, to reassure them that addition to the register does not result automatically in a designation. So if there's an amendment to the motion, I would be able to support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm open to these recommendations. I think that they do make sense. The idea of amending the motion that's before us to deal with the register, and then seeing the designation portion debated based on a notice of motion. So I don't know if Councillor Menard is amenable to that solution.
That sounds right to me.
Excellent. I do see additional hands up. I don't know if Vice Chair Quinn has raised her hand again, or if not, then Member Podolsky, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I am very, very uncomfortable with the proceeding with putting this property on the register now, especially since we have confessed that since 2017, this building has been part of the process of adding buildings to the register. And I hate to say it, we have overlooked a monumental convent through you know, an inadvertent oversight. I think that we somehow have to swallow our pride and to convey to the public that these kind of things can't happen again. And if they do happen, we've got to find ways to maintain public confidence in the heritage designation and listing process. And I think that this is not a small property that was missed on a street view. This is a major property, and I think that it would be very important to defer the discussion, even of putting it on the register, until we can actually hear from the owner and the owner's representatives. This is making me extremely uncomfortable about the integrity of the city's process. So I just thought I'd share that. And if there is a call to vote on the listing, I'm going to be opposed to that in principle.
Thank you for that, Member Podolsky. So I was just wondering, based on that further input, whether Councillor Menard has any further response or a change of approach in terms of this item and these items moving forward.
I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here with these items, to be honest with you. This item came up very fast, and it wasn't until it was raised that I realized there was an error that had happened in the past, and I think staff were also in the same boat. It wasn't intentional. So normally this would not occur. But in this case, I'm willing to go with what Councillor Moffat has proposed. I think that's reasonable, and it gives us a source of protection, but also gives the applicant more time to have those discussions that are needed over the next couple of months and get to a situation. As I say, just on the look of this, I don't necessarily think this meets a full designation. However, the process is such that it makes sense to move in a direction of getting it on the register, to not have it be lost completely without having done that other due diligence as well. So we've got two due diligence process here, so we're trying to work with. So I appreciate Member Podolsky's very helpful input. And as I say, I am open to the amendment that Councillor Moffat has raised. And I'm also open if staff have more information on how much time we have, where we could just provide for a notice of motion today and consideration of the next meeting, I'm also open to that. So I don't want to prescribe it, but I'm open to both of those directions, Chair, and in your and staff's hands in how we go about this.
What I'll do is I will ask staff for the latest information that they have around the demolition element. And let's just see if staff feels confident that we have a scenario with the demolition notice that will allow for us to have a fulsome dialogue. I would trend towards the notice of motion, but I'm interested in hearing staff's view on this based on the information that has come in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, apologies for, as Councillor Menard noted, this is happening as we're talking. There was a little bit of confusion because the building is a former convent as to whether or not it was subject to demolition control, but I've received confirmation from colleagues now that it is considered residential, which would mean it is subject to demolition control under the Planning Act, which means that it cannot be demolished without a replacement building without a formal demolition control application. I don't have a specific timeline for how long that takes, but I do feel comfortable that if the committee was to go the direction of a notice of motion to March, that the building would be safe. No guarantees, but that's my recommendation.
That's good to know, because obviously we're balancing these issues. We want to ensure protection, but we also want to ensure procedural fairness, and that the notice of motion would provide for procedural fairness. And based on what we're hearing from staff, the timeline most likely would accommodate it based on the process for demolition. Obviously this is at the behest of Councillor Menard, but would you feel comfortable, Councillor Menard, with just moving with a notice of motion today? So removing the motion that we are in effect wanting to look at today and moving that forward.
Yeah, that was my original preference, and now that we have this information, absolutely, that is fine with me.
And I see that Councillor Moffat has raised his hand.
Thanks. Just procedurally, since the motion's already in front of us and we've already walked it on, it might just be easier just to move deferral of recommendation to the next meeting of this committee, and then vote on the motion as amended by the deferral on item 2.
And I'm open to that. I'm wondering if the committee clerk can comment on that.
Chair, it would be up to the committee whether it defers or permits the motion to be withdrawn and resubmitted as a notice of motion. The notice of motion procedure would allow for a transmittal report to be drafted.
I think I would feel comfortable with the motion being withdrawn and with it being just submitted as a notice of motion.
Sure, I certainly concur with that.
That's fine with me.
I can support that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I support that as well.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll see. We'll consider that the motion being withdrawn, and we'll see the motion come back again here relatively soon. In terms of notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting.
So I can read out the be it resolved again if you'd like, Chair. Through yourself and Councillor McKenney, therefore be it resolved the Build Heritage Subcommittee recommended Council 1, approve the addition of 15 Days Oblatz Avenue to the City of Ottawa's Heritage Register under Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and 2, direct staff to review the property to determine if it meets the criteria under Ontario Regulation 906 for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And that's it.
Sounds familiar. Have we dealt with that before?
Well, thank you for the submission of that notice of motion. The next item is inquiries. We have had none to date. Any other business? Seeing none. On adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried. Bye, everybody.
Carried.
Chair. Hello.
Councillor Brockington wants to speak.
Sorry.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Chair, just informally, if I can ask for a future meeting, I'd like to ask staff to provide some information on what triggers a protection plan. There have been too many cases in my ward where this was not part of a site plan because staff did not agree it was necessary. So I'm really asking, what are the criteria that staff use that trigger a protection plan? We heard a good example today where that's used. I certainly support it, but I want to get a little more information. It's not necessarily a heritage staff question, rather larger for the planning department when this gets triggered as part of a site plan.
Sorry for the oversight on other business. I'm happy to receive that as an inquiry for staff.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. And so now on to adjournment. Is that motion carried? And I believe it might have been.
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thanks,
You're-
everyone.
You're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. There will be a special joint meeting of the Planning Committee and the Built Heritage Subcommittee, followed by a special meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee on Friday, February 5th, 2021, in relation to the Chateau Laurier heritage permit application. The next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March the 9th, 2021. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
It's rare that I can use the same joke twice, but that sounds familiar. Have we dealt with that before? Okay, bye.
Again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.